So these are the armatures.
Yeah, this is how an armature starts. Now those guys, I will go ahead and build the body because the ones I'm picking are basically a U shape.
And what drew you to the petroglyphs?
Well, I grew up in Central Oregon, and we had things like petroglyphs and whatnot, but they were really rare. And some of them were down in the lava tubes and caves because it's a very volcanic area. That's where the love for volcanism came. And I started learning about it in the 9th grade in a summer program that our science teacher had. And it was his first year of teaching because he was a geologist. But things were just drying up and he was finding no interest, and he didn't want to do petroleum geology always, and that's about what was left there. So he went to teaching school, and I had the luck of getting him. And he had a thing where any of us that wanted to sign up could sign up, and we would do field trips all summer. And they used a bus, and we went 2 and 3 days a week through the whole summer out, sometimes to lava tubes and caves, sometimes to spatter cones, all the way to Crater Lake, where they had launch boat rides around the inside of the lake. And they would stop at Wizard Island. Now there's several islands there, but that is so deep, and because it was a volcano, and the hole goes down forever. And I mean, they don't even know how deep it was in those days. And sometimes there'd be bubbles coming up and stuff. And Bend, where I grew up, was also a ski area, and Mount Bachelor was there, right in the heart of the Cascades. Well, you know, I wanted to learn how to do that stuff, and I always had to have jobs and work. I always had a job or two. I worked at Mount Bachelor on the weekends my years of high school, and then I got we'd work a half day, and we got a half day of skiing free. Well, up there you'd go up the mountain, and there were all these ridges, and sometimes where they had what's called cornices from the snow, all of a sudden they'd be gone. They would have let loose and gone down. So
like a rock slide or something.
Yeah, except it was snow.
Yeah.
And they had to keep those areas really well watched because it was the steam vents from the volcanics below that would come up, and it would leave holes up through maybe 300 inches of snow up through, and then something would happen, it'd get a little too warm, and the whole thing would just let loose and roll again. So they always sent people out to check that and to put stakes to keep the skiers away from those areas. Well, at that same time, whenever we would drive from Bend into Portland, we'd go around Mount Hood there. Mount Hood had one place over on the side that Portland is on that there'd be maybe 300, 400, 500 inches of snow on the mountain, and all of a sudden they'd all be gone in just one spot. And it would happen overnight. And it was just so amazing. So like we'd drive in and it would be all snow. We'd go to drive home and there would be that bare spot. Well, that was the volcanics again and the heat coming up. So from 9th grade on, I kind of planned when I'd go to bed at night, I'd plan who would be the people that I should be in contact with for survival when everything went. And so, you know, the people that knew how to camp, you know, friends who were, well, they're called survivalists now. But, you know, I was just a kid in high school. But I had all these plans, and everything just stayed calm. By the time I had been to Alaska, come back down here, and was in Columbus, Mount St. Helens blew without me.
Because anything we planned for never happens.
Well, it just was, I mean, it did it without me. I wasn't there. I was so ticked. I watched everything I could and got every bit of what I could, information. But it did it without me. And so volcanics have always been a great love. And now I live at the foot of those wonderful mountains, the Floridas. and you know, everybody wants to call them the Floridas. It's the Floridas.
Yeah.
And that was a domal uplift that pushed all that strata and everything up, because of the magma underneath, the igneous intrusion. And that whole thing came up, and that is, well, the geology of New Mexico is so exciting. And as I have traveled around the state, I see things, and they stay here. I didn't have a camera, we didn't have the telephones, you know. But those images stay, and that's the images that come out in my sculptures. The lentil, that's from something I have seen, and I did the lentil to try and show the shadows. And it changes through the whole day as the shadows. Oh, it's too tight there.
Got it.
I got too many things. See how the shadows change all the time through, and actually the sculpture, yeah, but it's the shadows on the sculpture that I find exciting. So that's one of them that I had seen, and of course Rosebud Rock is, and over here the mountain that's the igneous intrusion. And this piece of wood was just so much like my mountains out there.
Yeah,
Of course,
they do look
they're
a
my
lot.
mountains, you know. But I wanted to be able to represent the igneous intrusion, the magma down underneath. And that's actual lava type stone from out here in the yard. How they all fit together. Anyway, that's the mountain. Igneous intrusion causing domal uplift. And all of the dust, that I'd work really hard to get all of the dust, you know, in all the right spots. So, and of course I love the bones. Those are all animal bones. Actually they're cow bones from out here off of the desert, and they have such a beauty about them. That's ridges, and those were pieces of firewood. And a friend thought, gee, those look like Diana's mountaintops. I'll take those to Diana. But you see, they're just old hunks of wood that
Like
got
slab
broken
wood.
off.
Yeah.
And there they are, and that's called ridges.
Very nice.
This is how and where I found my petroglyphs. This book and I have been inseparable since I got it. These, it's over on the Utah and Arizona border. But they went ahead and they show you just wonderful, wonderful how it looked on the walls.
Oh.
And then how it looked here and some of the places. So this is how and where I pick the things up. And look at these. That's what those guys are going to become, are things like this. And this is a whole lot of why people here think that, you know, all of this stuff about extraterrestrials coming and...
Well, the Anasazi believed in them.
Well, yeah. I mean, what's not to believe? And yeah, you know, oh, well, that's just representing their feathers, and that's representing this and that. But just look at that. It's like it's a dragonfly.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's how and where a lot of those ideas for petroglyphs, although there's a lot of them up, it's called the Pony Foothills, and it's just out here to the north and east of Deming. And you go walking out across, and these big boulders appear, and there'll be little tiny footprints next to bigger footprints. So a child's footprints, but these are petroglyphs. And they go up these giant big stones and down and to the next one and up and down in pairs. And they'll have little handprints and big handprints, and then lots of other petroglyphs, you know, different kinds of designs and stuff. But, I mean, they're there, and they're further over in around Cook's Peak, and we just have them everywhere. So everywhere where Paul and I would go for our business, we would, if there was a chance to go see petroglyphs, we would stop and see. And oddly enough, when we met, what he had started off going to school in was geology. And the same with me. Well, he went to 2 years at the School for Mines in South Dakota. Then he had to go into the Air Force because we were doing the Vietnam thing. And he never finished up his doing as, becoming a geologist. But at the same time, he was told if he did, he'd have to go into petroleum. He didn't want petroleum. And that was the time when I was trying to get my degree in geology. But luckily, the director of the department, after 2 years, pulled me in and said, Diana, we're so glad to have a woman in the department. But you have to understand, when you graduate, there'll be no jobs for you unless you want to work in a laboratory. Well, no, I don't do math. I don't do things. I don't do those things. I said, no, I want field geology. And he says, well, dear, there just won't be anything for you. So like a very good, well-trained woman of the early 60s, I said, oh, thank you so much. So I went in and changed my
Major?
From geology to secondary art ed, being pottery and jewelry making. And then a couple years later, I picked up special education as well. And so that's how I proceeded. I had to have a way of making a living. I was raised by a single mom, and I just was never going to be left without a way to make a living. And it was a Kokopelli, but I had never seen one like it. But, that's
So you
the
saw
way
this in
things go.
Akiva?
Yeah. Usually the walls will have paintings on them, not generally pictographs themselves, but paintings of. And that's kind of what he was. He doesn't have a name.
No?
But what he was mostly representing to me at the time is an awful lot of the petroglyphs would have the legs go down, and then you'd have the foot shape, and of course it would just be flat. But I don't see things flat. I see them three-dimensional. So that's how come he's got all of his toes and his feet, and they do the same thing with the hands. It'll just be hands and like
flat.
that. But here we go. And I really liked him because the petroglyph actually was rounded like this. Like that was possibly a, what's that called that they put over their heads and wear? Helmet. Yeah.
And it proves they had TV antennas, right?
Obviously. Yeah.
Where was this petroglyph from? What area?
Oh, he's out of that same area.
Yeah.
I've just been so enamored with that whole area because it had more humanoid like drawings and pickings than most places, and I really like that. When I first got out here, I was asking people, and there was a very nice man that worked at a museum over in El Paso, and he was their main person on petroglyphs. He had studied them, and he explained to me, though, that the ones that aren't necessarily the people and by themselves, but you look at them, most of them are telling a story, or they are a map, or they are both. Telling a story and a map, and you can kind of follow them and figure out the story. And when when horses were finally introduced to the area and the continent, they started showing up in the pictographs, and so did the soldiers in their hats and various things, and it told the stories of the different battles and the engagements that the indigenous people had, and with what they were having to deal with all of these people flooding from the east into the west and just taking everything over.